Okay, Big Bird, we have a baseball, and you do very funny things with that ball. When you talk on the mound, not only do you throw strikes, fortunately,
Yeah.
but when you're on the mound, are you talking only to the baseball? Really now, Mark?
No, I'm keeping my mind in the game. I might look at the ball, but I'm just keeping my mind in the game, saying, if I get the ball, where am I going to go with it? Or what's going to happen? Where should I throw this ball this time? You tell myself where to release the ball, what point to release it.
Well, I really don't have to do anything. We've got 7, 8, 10 players in this club that could have been named captain or, guys who are really considered leaders. I hope we get every great player in the league over here. It's going to make everybody's job a lot easier. And my job is just to go out and play baseball and try to win the ball games.
He knew the so-called feud had Thurman Munson all wrong. On June 28, 1976, a national television audience watched a rookie pitcher who talked to a baseball like an old friend, right there on live national television. Tiger Stadium held 47,855 fans that night, and thousands more were turned away at the gates outside. Mark Fidrych fixed the mound with his bare hands and spoke quietly to the ball before every pitch he threw. He paced quickly around the mound and never seemed to slow down all night. Yankees veterans watched from their dugout with narrowed eyes, unsure what to make of the young pitcher standing before them. And while we clear away that noise, use the hype feature, and give this video some hype for the player's history misunderstood. Thurman Munson called it bush, an old word for fake and unprofessional. The press smelled a story and wrote about a feud before the game had finished. A reporter told Fidrych what Munson had said. Fidrych answered with 4 words. Who's Thurman Munson? Newspapers ran the line the next morning like a declaration of war. To understand what really happened that night, we need to go back and look at the whole game, not just the quote. The Tigers were not supposed to beat the Yankees. Detroit was a struggling team that summer, while New York sat on top of the American League East. But Fidrych took the mound in front of the whole country and made the Yankees look ordinary. He threw a complete game. He allowed 7 hits. He walked nobody. The final score was 5-1, and the only Yankees run came from a solo home run hit by Elrod Hendricks. The entire game lasted just 1 hour and 51 minutes, which was remarkably fast even for that era of baseball. Thurman Munson did not play that night. He was nursing a bruised knee, one of many injuries he quietly carried through that long season. He sat in the visitors' dugout and watched everything unfold from the bench instead of behind home plate. What he watched looked strange to him. Fidrych dropped to one knee and smoothed the dirt on the mound with his bare hands, as if he were tending a small garden. He talked to the baseball before nearly every pitch, sometimes appearing to give it instructions. He walked quickly between pitches, rarely pausing to think or gather himself the way most pitchers did. To a veteran catcher raised on a strict, businesslike version of baseball, this looked like a show. Munson believed the field was a place for quiet, serious work, not performance. He used one blunt word to describe what he saw: bush. In the language of old-school ballplayers, that word meant amateurish, showy, and beneath the level of the major leagues. He was not alone in that view. Yankees second baseman Willie Randolph agreed with him. Randolph suggested that if a pitcher tried those same routines in New York, he would likely get thrown at, or worse, in retaliation. It was a warning wrapped inside a criticism. After the game ended, reporters carried that criticism straight to Fidrych in the clubhouse. They told the rookie exactly what Munson and Randolph had said about his mound behavior. They wanted a reaction, a spark, something dramatic to print the next morning. Fidrych gave them one, though not the one they expected. Asked directly about Thurman Munson's comments, Fidrych answered with a simple, honest question of his own. Who's Thurman Munson? It is important to be clear about what did not happen. Fidrych and Munson never stood face to face and argued. There was no shouting match, no dugout confrontation, no heated exchange between the two men themselves. The entire moment existed only through secondhand comments, relayed by reporters eager for a storyline. That distinction mattered, but it rarely made it into print. A short, blunt quote from a rookie was far easier to turn into a headline than a nuanced explanation of two very different personalities colliding under strange circumstances. Newspapers across the country ran versions of the same story the next day, framing Fidrych as disrespectful and Munson as insulted. Radio broadcasters repeated the line for laughs or outrage. Within days, casual fans who barely followed baseball had heard the phrase, "Who's Thurman Munson?" repeated on television and in barbershops. A single sentence, spoken without any real malice, had been stretched into a full narrative of conflict between a rising young star and an established champion. The truth sitting underneath that story was far less exciting to print, but it was far more revealing about who these two men actually were. Fidrych had arrived in the major leagues only weeks earlier, called up almost as an afterthought. He was a 10th-round draft pick, not a can't-miss prospect surrounded by hype. Nobody outside Detroit expected him to become the most talked-about player in the country by early summer. His habits on the mound were not new that night. He had done the same things in every start since entering the rotation in May. Talking to the ball and patting down the dirt were routines carried over from the minor leagues. What made the Yankees game different was simply the size of the audience watching him do it. To understand who's Thurman Munson, you have to understand who Mark Fidrych actually was before that moment. He grew up focused almost entirely on the mechanics of pitching. He was not a young man who studied box scores or memorized the league's biggest stars. He spent his childhood and his minor league years learning how to grip a curveball and repeat a delivery, not tracking which catcher played where. When he answered that question, he was not trying to insult a most valuable player candidate. He simply did not know the name, the same way a person deeply focused on one narrow skill might not recognize a famous face from an entirely different field. That kind of honesty is rare in professional sports, where image and reputation are carefully managed from the very start of a career. Fidrych had no filter for that kind of thing. He answered questions the way he pitched, quickly and without hesitation, saying exactly what was true in the moment. That directness was mistaken for arrogance by people who assumed a smart remark must have been calculated. It was not calculated. It was simply honest. Fidrych was not acting like a smug young star trying to prove a point. He was not performing false modesty either. He was a young man who had spent his whole life thinking about one thing, and it showed the moment he opened his mouth. His teammates understood this even when outsiders did not. Veterans like Rusty Staub and Willie Freehan, both respected figures in the Detroit clubhouse, spoke up in his defense as the season went on. They explained that the mound routines people found strange were not designed for attention. Fidrych talked to the ball and smoothed the dirt, because those actions helped him concentrate, not because he wanted cameras pointed at him. Staub and Freehan had watched him do the same things in quiet games with small crowds, long before any national television audience existed. That detail mattered. A performer needs an audience to perform for. Fidrych behaved the exact same way whether 5,000 people were watching or 50,000. Opposing players slowly noticed this consistency too. Across the rest of that 1976 season, veterans who had once bristled at his energy began to change their minds. They saw a young pitcher who threw strikes, worked fast, and never once used his personality as an excuse for weak effort. His numbers backed up what his teammates already knew. 19 wins, a league-leading earned run average, and 24 complete games are not the record of a pitcher coasting on charm. Thurman Munson, watching from a distance, eventually reached the same conclusion. He respected results more than he respected reputation, and Fidrych kept producing results start after start. The rookie's control was sharp. His stamina was unusual for someone so young. His lack of arrogance became harder to deny with every passing month. None of this means the two men became close friends who spoke often or shared long conversations. Nothing in the record suggests that kind of personal bond ever formed between them. What changed instead was quieter and, in some ways, more meaningful. Two men who judged the game by effort and honesty slowly recognized those same qualities in each other, even from a distance, even without warm words passing between them. The press had judged Fidrych by his appearance on the mound, his talking, his pacing, his visible joy. Munson judged him by something else entirely. He judged him by whether the work was real. Once that question was answered, the basis for any real dislike simply faded away, leaving behind a quiet, mutual respect that never made headlines the way the original insult had. That kind of respect rarely gets written about, because it does not come with a dramatic quote or a clean ending. It builds slowly, through repeated evidence, until one day, the old suspicion simply is not there anymore. Nobody announces the moment it happens. It just becomes true, quietly, somewhere in the middle of a long, demanding season neither man ever talked about afterward. To really understand why Munson's opinion carried so much weight, you have to understand exactly who he was to that Yankees team in 1976. This was not just another veteran catcher with a passing opinion. Before that season began, Munson had been named captain of the New York Yankees. That title was not handed out casually. He was the first Yankees captain since the great Lou Gehrig, all the way back in 1939. For decades, no one had worn that title in New York. When the Yankees finally gave it to Munson, they were placing him alongside one of the most respected names in franchise history. The weight of that decision showed up in how the team performed that year. In 1976, the Yankees reached the American League pennant for the first time in 12 long years. 12 years of frustration, near misses, and disappointment ended with Munson standing at the center of a winning club. His own numbers that season explain part of why. He hit .302 for the year, a strong average for any player, let alone a catcher absorbing the daily punishment of that position. He hit 17 home runs and drove in 105 runs, numbers that placed him among the best offensive players in the entire league regardless of position. He also collected 186 hits, showing consistency across a long, grinding season, rather than a few hot streaks. weeks. Those numbers alone were impressive enough to earn him the American League Most Valuable Player award that year, a rare honor for a catcher. But focusing only on the statistics misses half the story of why Munson mattered so much. Catching in professional baseball is a uniquely demanding job. A catcher squats behind the plate for every single pitch of every single game, absorbing foul tips, blocking pitches in the dirt, and taking direct hits from runners crashing home. On top of the physical toll, a catcher has to manage an entire pitching staff, calling pitches, reading hitters, and adjusting strategy inning by inning. Munson did all of this while also hitting well enough to be named the league's most valuable player. His rapid throwing release helped control opposing base runners who might otherwise have run wild. His game calling helped guide a pitching staff through a long, difficult pennant race. None of that shows up cleanly in a simple statistics table, but every teammate on that roster understood exactly what he provided. Leadership on a baseball team rarely looks the way people imagine from the outside. It is not just giving speeches or shouting encouragement from the dugout. For Munson, leadership meant something far more physical and far more costly. It meant playing through pain that would have kept most players on the bench. Munson dealt with broken fingers throughout that era of his career, the kind of injury that makes every single pitch received behind the plate a small act of pain management. He played through bone bruises that would have sidelined a less determined player for weeks at a time. He caught through knee inflammation, the exact issue that kept him out of the famous game against Fidrych, yet he rarely missed extended time when the team needed him in the lineup. Leadership also meant holding teammates accountable, even when that made him unpopular in the clubhouse. Munson was not interested in comfortable relationships built on empty praise. He wanted effort, focus, and results from the players around him, and he was willing to say so directly rather than let poor habits slide. He protected the team's identity fiercely, treating outside criticism and internal weakness with the same lack of patience. He refused to accept players who coasted through games or avoided difficult moments. When pressure built during a tense pennant race, Munson did not shrink from it. He absorbed that pressure and used it to push his team forward instead of letting it break the group apart. This is the context that makes his reaction to Fidrych so important to understand correctly. Munson was not some random veteran nursing a minor grudge against a flashy rookie. He was the emotional and competitive standard-bearer for baseball's most storied franchise, a man who had personally carried a difficult team back to relevance after more than a decade of frustration. When a man like that questioned Fidrych's mound behavior, it did not come from jealousy toward a rising star. It came from the same demanding standard he applied to every single player around him, including himself, every single day of that long, grinding season. Munson's standards did not only apply to strangers on the field, they shaped nearly every relationship in his professional life, and not all of those relationships were smooth. Munson kept sports reporters at arm's length for most of his career. He distrusted the kind of intrusive coverage that tried to dig into a player's private life away from the ballpark. Where some athletes chased headlines and easy publicity, Munson often gave short, guarded answers, unwilling to hand reporters anything beyond what the game itself required. That guardedness extended into his relationship with Yankees owner George Steinbrenner. The two men clashed repeatedly over contracts, team direction, and questions of respect. Munson believed his role as captain and franchise leader deserved a certain level of trust and compensation, and he was not shy about saying so when he felt that trust was missing. He also carried one of the most heated rivalries in baseball with Boston Red Sox catcher Carlton Fisk. Their conflict became physical in 1973, during a home plate collision and fight that broke out around a suicide squeeze play. That single moment deepened the already bitter rivalry between New York and Boston for years afterward, becoming a symbol of the intensity both men brought to the game. Tension also arose closer to home. When Reggie Jackson joined the Yankees, he gave a magazine interview describing himself as the straw that stirs the drink, a comment that suggested he alone carried the team's success. Munson, who had spent years building the team's identity through daily sacrifice rather than bold public statements, did not take kindly to the remark. Friction between the two players followed, rooted in very different ideas about where leadership and credit should come from. Over time, the two men worked past that conflict and found a way to coexist as teammates chasing the same championship goals. None of these conflicts should be read as proof that Munson was automatically right in every disagreement. He could be harsh with teammates who fell short of his standards. He could be combative with reporters simply doing their jobs, and stubborn in negotiations where compromise might have served everyone better. His personality created real friction inside and outside the clubhouse, and that friction was not always fair to the people on the other side of it. Yet that same demanding personality is exactly what earned him deep trust from teammates who watched him apply the harshest standard to himself first. Munson played through injuries that would have benched most other players without complaint or excuse. He held himself to the same painful expectations he placed on everyone around him, which is part of why his criticism, however blunt, rarely felt like simple bullying to the people who knew him best. His skepticism toward Fidrych's mound routines belongs inside this same pattern of behavior. Munson had little patience for anything that looked like empty showmanship, whether it came from a brash veteran or an unproven rookie making his first national television appearance. What changed his mind about Fidrych was not a sudden change of heart or a private apology. It was simple, repeated evidence. Fidrych kept winning. He kept pitching deep into games with real efficiency and real command over hitters. He never once used his energy or his personality as cover for weak effort on the mound. Once that evidence built up across an entire season, the basis for Munson's early disrespect quietly disappeared, replaced by the same respect he offered any teammate or opponent who consistently backed up their play with results on the field. It is worth sitting with that pattern for a moment, because it explains so much about the man behind the captain's title. Munson was never impressed by charm on its own. He had seen plenty of talented players coast on personality without matching it to daily effort, and he had little patience left for that particular type of player. What he respected instead was consistency under pressure, the willingness to show up and perform the same way in June as in September, whether the cameras were rolling or not. Fidrych, without ever trying to prove anything to Munson directly, ended up demonstrating exactly that kind of consistency through his pitching alone. The two men never needed a conversation to settle their differences. The work itself did the talking, start after start, season after season, in a language both of them understood far better than anything written in a newspaper column. Place Fidrych and Munson side by side, and the surface differences are impossible to miss. Fidrych was open, energetic, and often visibly emotional on the mound. He laughed easily, celebrated small moments with real joy, and never seemed to hide what he was feeling in front of thousands of strangers. Munson was almost the opposite in public. He was guarded, private, and quick to push back against anyone who tried to get too close, whether that person carried a notebook or wore an opposing uniform. Fidrych talked to the baseball itself, treating it almost like a partner in every pitch he threw. Munson barely wanted to talk to reporters, let alone an inanimate object resting in his own glove. Fidrych drew massive crowds through pure joy and spectacle, turning ordinary Tuesday night games into sellouts across the country. Munson commanded an entire clubhouse through pressure, toughness, and an unspoken sense that he would not accept anything less than full effort. And yet, underneath those very different surfaces, both men were built from remarkably similar material. Neither one chased celebrity for its own sake. Neither one viewed professional baseball as a personal brand to be managed and marketed. Both men preferred the actual game itself far more than the attention that surrounded it, even as that attention grew larger with every passing month of 1976. Both carried a distinctly blue-collar mentality into a sport that was rapidly becoming more commercial with the arrival of free agency and bigger television contracts. Both became reluctant icons almost against their own wishes, uncomfortable with the size of the spotlight even as millions of fans reached out to embrace them. Both demanded honest effort from teammates and from themselves, refusing to accept excuses when the work fell short of what the moment required. Both resisted, in their own separate ways, the increasingly commercial direction professional sports were heading toward during that decade. Fidrych's simple lifestyle away from the ballpark tells part of this story clearly. He appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine and became one of the most photographed athletes in the entire country almost overnight. Despite that fame, he continued living in a small apartment and driving a modest subcompact car, nothing close to the image most fans might expect from a national celebrity. He earned a league minimum salary of just $16,500 that season, a modest sum even by the standards of that era. He once wondered aloud whether that salary would even cover the cost of postage needed to respond to the mountains of fan mail suddenly arriving at his door. Fidrych's impact on Detroit baseball that summer went far beyond his own personal habits. He posted a 19-9 record with a league-leading earned run average of 2.34. He completed 24 games on his own, a number that would be almost unthinkable for a young starting pitcher in later decades of the sport. He pitched 250 innings across that single remarkable season. Nearly half of Detroit's entire home attendance that year came specifically during the 18 starts he made at Tiger Stadium, a staggering statistic that shows exactly how much one player could move an entire fan base. His average start lasted roughly 2 hours and 11 minutes. Remarkably fast, even for an era when games generally moved quicker than they do today. None of this comparison exists to decide which man deserves to be called better than the other. That question misses the entire point of placing them side by side in the first place. The real purpose is to show that two players who looked like complete opposites on the surface were, underneath it all, built from the exact same basic material. Both loved the game more than the noise surrounding it, and both proved that love through consistent, honest work rather than through words spoken to cameras or reporters. The story of Fidrych's career takes a difficult turn after that magical 1976 season ended. He had just won the American League Rookie of the Year award, capping one of the most electric debut seasons anyone had ever seen. Nobody watching him celebrate that winter could have guessed how quickly things would change. During spring training in 1977, Fidrych suffered a serious cartilage tear in his left knee. The injury happened in a routine moment while he was simply shagging fly balls during practice. Nothing dramatic or dangerous about the situation at all. Eager to return to the mound as quickly as possible, Fidrych rushed his own rehabilitation instead of allowing his knee to heal properly. He came back to the Tigers' rotation in late May of that year, only a few months after the injury first occurred. To protect his still healing knee, Fidrych quietly changed the way he threw the ball. He shifted his weight differently and altered his natural delivery, trying to keep pressure off the joint that had just been repaired. At first, the results looked promising. He posted a 6-2 record with a remarkable 1.83 earned run average across his first 8 starts back. It seemed for a little while like he might pick up right where his rookie season had left off. But changing a pitching motion rarely comes without a cost somewhere else in the body. The extra stress from his adjusted delivery began quietly building up inside his throwing arm and shoulder, even though nobody could see it happening from the outside. On July 4, 1977, Fidrych took the mound against the Baltimore Orioles in what became a turning point for his entire career. He gave up a home run to Eddie Murray during that game, and immediately afterward he felt a strange, dead sensation spreading through his throwing arm. Something had clearly gone wrong inside his shoulder, but nobody around him understood exactly what that something was. Detroit's medical staff examined him repeatedly in the weeks and months that followed. Each time they diagnosed the issue as a simple muscle strain or basic tendinitis, common and usually temporary problems for a hard-throwing pitcher. Fidrych followed their instructions patiently, resting when told to rest, and pushing through therapy sessions meant to strengthen the injured area. For 4 long years, Fidrych cycled through this same painful pattern. He would rest, attempt therapy, try a comeback, and then break down again almost as soon as he returned to the mound. Each failed attempt chipped away a little more at the electric talent that had captivated the entire country back in 1976. Eventually, in 1981, the Detroit Tigers released him outright, ending his time with the only major league organization he had ever known. Refusing to give up completely, Fidrych signed on with Pawtucket, Boston's minor league affiliate, hoping for one more chance to prove his arm could still perform. That final chapter did not produce the comeback he was hoping for. In 1983, at just 28 years old, Fidrych officially retired from professional baseball. It was an age when most successful pitchers were only entering the prime years of their careers, not walking away from the game entirely. The full truth about his injury did not surface until 1985, a full 8 years after that fateful start against Baltimore. Dr. James Andrews, a respected orthopedic specialist, finally examined Fidrych's shoulder using more advanced medical techniques than had been available years earlier. Andrews discovered a completely torn rotator cuff, an injury that had apparently gone undiagnosed and untreated throughout Fidrych's entire professional career. It is important not to overstate what that discovery means looking backward. The research does not prove that modern medicine would have guaranteed Fidrych a full, healthy career if the tear had been found immediately. What it does show clearly is that the injury likely would have been identified far sooner under today's diagnostic tools, giving him at least a genuine chance at proper treatment that he never actually received. This part of Fidrych's story connects directly back to the larger theme running through both these careers. Tough, driven athletes were often expected to simply keep going, to push through pain and vague diagnoses, while the medical systems responsible for protecting their bodies failed to fully understand what was actually happening inside them. While Fidrych was struggling through his own painful comeback attempts in the minor leagues, Thurman Munson's story reached a very different and far more devastating ending. Munson had always wanted to stay closely connected to his family, even during the demanding grind of a full major league season. His wife Diana and their 3 children lived in Canton, Ohio, and Munson hated being away from them for long stretches at a time. To manage that distance more easily, he purchased a twin-engine jet, a Cessna Citation, hoping it would let him fly home between games whenever the Yankees' schedule allowed it. On August 2, 1979, an off day for the entire team, Munson decided to practice touch-and-go landings at Akron-Canton Regional Airport, close to his family's home. 2 other men, David Hall and Jerry Anderson, joined him aboard the aircraft that afternoon for what should have been a routine practice session. Munson made several approaches to the runway without any serious problem. On his 4th approach toward runway 19, something went wrong. He did not maintain enough airspeed as the aircraft descended toward the ground. He also failed to fully deploy the landing flaps needed for a safe, controlled landing at that speed. The jet began falling below the proper glide path without enough power to correct itself in time. It struck a line of trees roughly 1,000 feet short of the runway, well before it should have made contact with anything at all. The impact tore into the aircraft and sparked an immediate, fast-moving fire. Munson suffered a serious fracture to his neck the moment the plane struck the trees and the ground. That injury left him unable to move enough to free himself from his seat inside the burning cockpit. David Hall and Jerry Anderson both managed to escape the wreckage, though both men suffered serious burns in the process of getting clear. Despite their efforts, neither man was able to pull Munson free from the aircraft before the fire consumed the cabin around him. Thurman Munson died from smoke inhalation at just 32 years old, in a quiet regional airport far from the noise and pressure of Yankee Stadium. The National Transportation Safety Board later investigated the crash thoroughly. Their official ruling placed the blame on pilot error, specifically pointing to improper airspeed management during that final, fatal approach to the runway. News of Munson's death spread quickly through New York, and through baseball as a whole. The very next day, the Yankees were scheduled to host the Baltimore Orioles at Yankee Stadium, and the team decided the game would go on as planned. Before that game began, the Yankees made a decision that said more than any speech could have. They left the catcher's box completely empty during pregame ceremonies, a silent, visible reminder of exactly who was missing from behind home plate. A crowd of 51,151 fans filled the stadium that night, far more than a typical midweek game would normally draw. When the moment came to honor Munson, that entire crowd rose together and delivered a standing ovation that lasted a full 10 minutes without stopping. Teammate Bobby Mercer had traveled to Ohio to deliver a personal eulogy at Munson's funeral just hours earlier that same day. Rather than staying away from the ballpark to grieve privately, Mercer chose to fly back and suit up for that night's game less than 24 hours after speaking at his friend's funeral. What Mercer did on the field that night became one of the most emotional moments in franchise history. He drove in all 5 Yankees runs by himself over the course of the game. In the 9th inning, with the game still hanging in the balance, Mercer delivered a 2-run walk-off single that won the game outright for New York. The final score stood at 5-4, a Yankees victory carried almost entirely on the shoulders of one grieving teammate, honoring his captain in the only language that felt true enough for the moment. News of the crash reached teammates in different ways, some hearing it on the radio, others getting a phone call in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. For a roster built around Munson's steady, demanding presence behind the plate, the silence he left behind was impossible to fill with words alone. Coaches struggled to explain the loss to younger players who had only known Munson as an intense, unshakable figure in the clubhouse. Veteran players who had clashed with him over the years found themselves grieving just as hard as anyone else on the roster, a reminder that respect and friction had never been opposites where Munson was concerned. The empty catcher's box became more than a simple gesture that single night. It stood as a lasting symbol of exactly how much responsibility one player had quietly carried for that entire team, year after year, without ever needing to say so out loud. By the time 1979 arrived, the paths of these two men could not have looked more different from the outside. Fidrych was fighting simply to hold on to a professional baseball career at all, cycling through minor league assignments and painful rehabilitation attempts, far from any national spotlight. Munson, meanwhile, remained one of the best and most respected catchers in the entire sport, still anchoring a Yankees team built around his leadership. Yet by the end of that same year, both careers had been taken away in strikingly different ways. Fidrych's career was stolen slowly, piece by piece, by an injury that nobody around him managed to properly identify in time. Munson's career and his life were both taken suddenly, in a single tragic afternoon that nobody could have predicted or prevented. Looking at their stories together reveals something larger about the era both men played in. Fidrych's case exposed real limits within sports medicine as it existed during the late 1970s. His experience showed clearly that an injury in one part of the body, like his knee, could quietly damage another part entirely, like his throwing shoulder, without doctors immediately understanding the connection between the two. It showed that shoulder pain in a hard-throwing pitcher could not always be safely dismissed as simple, temporary soreness. Modern sports medicine eventually placed far greater focus on advanced imaging, careful evaluation of how the entire body moves together, and structured workload management designed to protect young arms before serious damage occurs. Munson's death carried a different kind of institutional weight. His crash highlighted the real risks major league clubs faced whenever active players chose to take part in dangerous activities away from the field, activities the teams themselves had very little control over. In the years that followed, player contracts increasingly began including specific specific restrictions tied to hazardous hobbies, particularly private aviation, reflecting lessons learned directly from what happened to Munson. Beyond those contract changes, the Yankees made their own lasting decision about how to honor him. The organization retired his number 15, ensuring no future Yankee would ever wear it again. His locker inside the clubhouse was preserved exactly as he left it, untouched by anyone who came after him. He was later honored as a Monument Park recipient, placing him permanently among the most respected figures in franchise history. None of this should suggest that either man single-handedly caused every change that followed inside professional baseball. Their stories did not create new rules and new medical standards entirely on their own. What their stories did was illustrate, expose, and highlight problems that already existed quietly within the sport, problems that badly needed serious attention long before either man's career came to its own painful premature end. Consider how differently each man's ending is remembered today. Fidrych's decline unfolded slowly, in quiet minor league ballparks, away from the roaring crowds that once packed Tiger Stadium just to watch him warm up. There was no single moment when the public understood exactly what had gone wrong, only years of failed comebacks and vague explanations that never satisfied anyone who had watched him pitch in 1976. Munson's ending, by contrast, arrived in a single afternoon, with no warning and no chance for anyone to adjust or prepare. Both men, in their own separate ways, paid a heavy price connected to choices made away from the diamond, choices that seemed reasonable at the time and only looked dangerous in hindsight. Fidrych simply wanted to get back on the mound as quickly as possible. Munson simply wanted to get home to his family more often. Neither ambition seems unreasonable on its own. Together, they remind us that even the toughest, most driven athletes remain vulnerable to forces well beyond talent or effort alone. Both gave everything they had to the game itself, treating the work as more important than the attention surrounding it. Both were gone from Major League Baseball far too soon, one through an injury nobody caught in time, the other through a tragedy nobody saw coming that August afternoon. This story ends the way it should, with real, earned admiration for Thurman Munson. His teammates preserved his locker exactly as he left it, because the man who filled that space could never truly be replaced. Opponents who once called his mound skepticism harsh came to respect the same demanding standard that made him such a difficult out and such a trusted leader. The empty catcher's box that August night mattered because it showed, without a single word spoken, exactly how much weight one man had quietly carried for his entire team, season after season, injury after injury, without complaint. The rookie who once asked a simple, honest question did not need headlines to understand the captain's true value. He saw the work up close. He saw the honesty behind every difficult standard Munson set. In the end, the rookie saw the captain more clearly than the headlines ever did.